The rhythmic hum of the Stellar Explorer's engines had become white noise to Jonas Reed over the past 8 months. Standing at the observation deck, his weathered face reflected in the reinforced glass, he watched as the mysterious planet grew larger in view. Its surface was a tapestry of deep purples and swirling greens, unlike anything he'd seen in his 15 years of deep space exploration. "Captain Reed," Lieutenant William Parker's voice crackled through the ship's comm system. "We've pinpointed the signal's origin. It's coming from a valley in the northern hemisphere." Jonas straightened his uniform, running a hand through his graying hair. At 45, he was considered young for a mission captain, but his reputation for first contact scenarios had earned him this position. "Prepare the landing vessel," he responded. "And Will? Make sure Dr. Emily Blackwood has her xenobiology kit ready." The descent through the atmosphere was rougher than expected. Their small craft bucked against gravitational forces that seemed to defy their initial readings. Rachel Torres, their pilot, handled the controls with practiced precision, her dark eyes focused intently on the holographic display before her. "These readings are off the charts," muttered David Foster, the team's physicist. His fingers danced across multiple screens, trying to make sense of the data streaming in. "The signal's energy signature, it's like nothing we've ever encountered." As they touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering crystalline formations, Jonas felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that came with every first landing. The air outside was breathable, according to their instruments, but they donned their protective suits anyway, standard protocol for unknown environments. "Stay alert," Jonas instructed his team as the airlock cycled. "Dr. Blackwood, keep that scanner running. Lieutenant Parker, maintain weapon systems at ready but powered down. We're here to make friends, not start a war." The moment Jonas's boots touched the alien soil, he knew something was different about this planet. The ground had a slight give to it, like walking on dense moss, and the air carried a sweet, metallic taste even through his suit's filtration system. The crystalline formations cast prismatic patterns across their suits, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. They had barely begun their survey when Jonas felt it, a vibration through the ground that made his teeth chatter. At first, he thought it might be some kind of seismic activity, but the rhythm was too regular, too deliberate. "Movement," Parker whispered through the comm, 11 o'clock, behind the large crystal formation. Jonas turned slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs. What emerged from behind the crystal would forever change his understanding of life in the universe. The alien stood at least 12 feet tall, its body covered in what appeared to be overlapping plates of an iridescent material that shifted colors with each movement. Its 4 arms ended in hands with too many fingers to count at a glance, and its head, if you could call it that, was a complex arrangement of sensory organs that seemed to pulse with internal light. "Hold your positions," Jonas commanded, seeing Parker's hand drift toward his weapon. No sudden movements. The alien's presence was overwhelming, not just in size but in the sheer alienness of its being. It moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for its massive frame, and from somewhere within its body came a deep, resonating hum that Jonas could feel in his bones. In that moment, Jonas made a decision that would either get him killed or make history. He reached up and began to disengage his helmet. "Captain, no." Emily's voice was sharp with panic. "The atmosphere hasn't been fully analyzed." But Jonas knew that true contact required trust, and trust required vulnerability. As he removed his helmet, the alien's sensory organs pulsed more rapidly, and its humming changed pitch. The air was thick but breathable, just as their instruments had indicated. Slowly, deliberately, Jonas raised his empty hands and took a step forward. The alien's massive form tensed, and several of his team members gasped. But Jonas maintained eye contact, or what he assumed was eye contact, with the being's central sensory cluster. "We come in peace," he said clearly, knowing the words meant nothing to the creature but hoping his tone and body language would convey his intent. "We heard your signal. We're here to help." The alien's response was unexpected. It lowered itself to match Jonas's height, bringing its sensory cluster level with his face. The humming changed again, becoming almost musical, and one of its many-fingered hands reached out slowly. Jonas stood his ground, heart thundering in his chest but expression calm. The alien's finger, warm and surprisingly soft, gently touched his forehead. In that instant, Jonas's world exploded into color and sensation. Images, feelings, and concepts flooded his mind: a dying world, a desperate people, a call for help sent into the void with little hope of response. When the connection broke, Jonas staggered slightly, and the alien withdrew its hand. They stood there, human and alien, separated by millions of years of evolution in countless light-years of space, yet connected by something far more fundamental: the need to understand and be understood. "Captain," Emily's voice was barely a whisper, "are you all right?" Jonas nodded, never breaking his gaze from the alien. "Yes," he said, then smiled slightly. "And I think we just made first contact." The alien's plates shifted color to a deep blue, and its humming took on a softer tone. Jonas somehow knew, whether from their brief mental contact or simple intuition, that they had passed some crucial test. The being straightened to its full height and made a gesture that clearly meant, "Follow me." "Sir," Parker's voice was tense, "this isn't protocol. We should return to the ship and report this." Jonas shook his head. "Sometimes, Will, you have to know when to throw protocol out the window." He turned to his team. "I'm going with it. The rest of you, maintain position here. If something goes wrong..." He paused, considering his next words carefully, "make sure Earth knows what we found here." As Jonas followed the towering alien through the crystal forest, he couldn't help but feel that this was what he had been preparing for his entire life. Every mission, every first contact scenario, every diplomatic crisis had led to this moment. Somewhere ahead lay answers to questions humanity had been asking since they first looked up at the stars, and Jonas Reed was about to become the first human to learn them. The crystal seemed to sing as they passed, creating an otherworldly symphony that matched the alien's continuous humming. Jonas could only hope that his trust in this creature, and its apparent trust in him, would prove to be the beginning of something extraordinary, rather than a terrible mistake. But as they ventured deeper into the alien landscape, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that he had only scratched the surface of the mysteries this world held, and that the real challenges, and wonders, still lay ahead. The alien settlement defied every principle of architecture Jonas had ever known. Structures of living crystal merged seamlessly with the natural formations, creating a city that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. As Jonas followed his towering guide through winding passages, he noticed other aliens watching from a distance, their plates shifting through spectrums of color he couldn't even name. "This is incredible," Jonas breathed, his words echoing off the crystalline walls. The alien turned its sensory cluster toward him, and the now familiar humming changed to what Jonas was beginning to recognize as a questioning tone. Using a combination of gestures and expressions, Jonas had been attempting to communicate with the alien during their journey. He pointed to himself. "Jonas," he said clearly, then pointed to the alien with a questioning look. The being's humming changed pitch, producing a sound that seemed impossible for human vocal cords to replicate. Jonas attempted it anyway, managing a rough approximation that sounded like Theric. The alien's plates shifted to a warm golden color, which Jonas took as approval. "Theric," Jonas repeated, smiling. "It's good to meet you." Their makeshift communication continued as Theric led him deeper into the settlement. Through a series of gestures and occasional mental touches, brief connections that left Jonas's mind reeling with fragments of images and emotions, Jonas began to understand the gravity of the alien situation. Their world was dying. Not the planet they stood on, but their original home world, dozens of light-years away. This was a colony, one of the last refuges of their species, and it was failing. The crystalline structures that seemed so beautiful to Jonas were actually degrading, their energy slowly depleting. During one particularly clear mental exchange, Jonas witnessed a devastating image: thousands of Therak's people, their plates dull and lifeless, as their cities crumbled around them. The signal that had drawn the stellar explorer to this planet wasn't just a greeting, it was a desperate cry for help. How many survived? Jonas asked, knowing Therak couldn't understand his words but hoping the sentiment would carry through. Therak led him to a vast chamber where hundreds of aliens gathered, their bodies creating a living light show as they moved about their daily tasks. It was impressive, but Jonas could see the worry in their movements, the fear in the rapid color changes of their plates. Through another brief mental connection, Therak shared that these were all that remained of a species that had once numbered in the billions. Disease, resource depletion, and the failure of their crystalline technology had driven them to the brink of extinction. This colony was their last hope, but even here, the same problems were beginning to surface. Jonas reached for his communicator, intending to contact his ship, but Therak's hand gently stopped him. The aliens' plates had shifted to a deep, warning red. Through their next mental touch, Jonas understood, Therak's people were divided. Some, like Therak, believed their only hope lay in reaching out to other species. Others, traumatized by their species' near extinction, viewed all outsiders as potential threats. "I want to help," Jonas said firmly, meeting Therak's gaze. "My people have experience with crystal-based technologies. We might be able to find a solution together." He emphasized his words with gestures, trying to convey his sincerity. Therak's response was to lead Jonas to a small chamber filled with what appeared to be scientific equipment. Through their limited communication, Jonas began to understand that Therak was something of a scientist among his people, studying the degradation of their crystalline technology and searching for solutions. Over the next several hours, Jonas used his tablet to share information about Earth's advances in crystal engineering, while Therak demonstrated the principles behind their own technology. Despite the vast differences in their species, Jonas was amazed at how quickly they developed a crude but effective way of sharing complex ideas. However, their productive exchange was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside. Therak's plates shifted to an alarming shade of purple, and Jonas could hear agitated humming from multiple sources. Through their next mental contact, Jonas received a clear warning: other members of Therak's species were approaching, and they weren't happy about the humans' presence. "My team," Jonas said suddenly, remembering his crew waiting at the landing site. "I need to warn them." But before he could reach for his communicator, Therak had pulled him into a hidden alcove as heavy footsteps approached. The mental impression Jonas received was clear: by bringing him here, Therak had broken their society's strictest laws. The penalty for such betrayal was severe, but Therak seemed less concerned for himself than for Jonas's safety. In that moment, Jonas made another decision that would alter the course of both their species. He pulled out his communicator and, despite Therak's attempt to stop him, sent a message to his ship: situation complex but under control. Alien species friendly but in crisis. Standing orders suspended. Will maintain contact. Do not intervene. As he sent the message, Jonas knew he was violating every protocol in the book. His career, possibly even his freedom, could be forfeit. But looking at Therak, seeing the hope and trust in the alien's shifting colors, Jonas knew it was worth the risk. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and Therak's plates dimmed to nearly black, a clear attempt at camouflage. Jonas held his breath, pressing himself against the crystal wall. He had come too far to fail now. Somehow, he had to find a way to help these people, to prove that humanity could be trusted. The alternative was to watch another intelligent species vanish from the universe. As they hid in the darkness, Jonas felt Therak's hand rest gently on his shoulder, and a wave of gratitude washed over him through their mental connection. Whatever came next, they would face it together, human and alien, united by a common cause and the universal desire for survival. The crystalline corridor erupted in a cascade of colors as they were discovered. 5 of Therak's kind surrounded them, their plates pulsing with aggressive reds and yellows. The leader, a massive being even taller than Theric, produced a deep, resonating hum that made Jonas's teeth rattle. Through the emotional echoes of their earlier mental connections, Jonas could sense Theric's fear, not for himself, but for what this confrontation might mean for both their species. The mental impression was clear: these were the Guardians, the conservative faction dedicated to protecting their people from outside influence. Wait! Jonas stepped forward, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. We can explain. His words were cut short as one of the Guardians activated some kind of energy field that wrapped around him like liquid light, immobilizing him. Theric moved to intervene, but two other Guardians restrained him, their plates synchronizing in a display of unified purpose. The next few hours passed in a blur of motion and shifting colors as Jonas was transported to what he could only assume was some kind of judicial chamber. The room was vast, its walls lined with pulsing crystals that seemed to record and amplify the humming language of Theric's people. Hundreds of aliens filled the tiered seating, their plates creating a rippling aurora of colors as they communicated among themselves. Lieutenant Parker's voice crackled through Jonas's communicator, which the Guardians had apparently overlooked. "Captain, we've detected multiple energy signatures converging on your location. Should we mount a rescue operation?" "Negative," Jonas whispered, careful to keep his voice down. "Any aggressive action could destroy what little chance we have at diplomacy. Stand by and monitor." The trial, if that's what it was, began with a series of harmonized hums from what appeared to be a council of elders. Their plates shifted through complex patterns that Jonas wished he could understand. Theric was brought forward, and through occasional bursts of shared consciousness, Jonas began to piece together the proceedings. Theric was defending his actions, explaining the potential benefits of human cooperation. But the Guardians were presenting evidence of other alien civilizations that had promised help, only to exploit and abandon Theric's people in their time of need. The emotional weight of these memories, shared through the crystalline amplification system, was overwhelming. "Let me speak," Jonas called out, his voice echoing through the chamber. The humming ceased, and all sensory clusters turned toward him. "I know you can understand me, at least emotionally. Let me show you who we really are." The Elder Council conferred, their plates shifting through shades Jonas had never seen before. Finally, they gestured for the energy field to be deactivated. Jonas stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Humanity has faced extinction before," he began, pulling up images on his tablet of Earth's greatest environmental disasters and recoveries. "We've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we've learned from them. We understand what you're going through because we've been there." He displayed pictures of Earth's restored ecosystems, of human-alien cooperation on other worlds, of scientific achievements that had saved millions of lives. "We're not perfect, but we're trying to be better. And we want to help not because we want something from you, but because we understand that the universe is better when species work together." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of humming as the images were shared through their crystalline network. Jonas felt a familiar touch on his mind, Theric, sharing his own memories of their brief but meaningful cooperation, of the potential he had seen in human technology and determination. But then the lead Guardian stepped forward, and the mental impression Jonas received was like a blast of cold wind. Images of betrayal, of worlds stripped of resources by smiling diplomats who had promised friendship, of entire species reduced to servants in their own homes. The message was clear: trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. "You're right," Jonas responded, understanding the Guardian's fears. "Trust must be earned. So test us. Set conditions, establish boundaries, but don't turn away help when your survival depends on it. Look at your crystalline network, it's already failing. Within a generation, it could collapse completely." The Elder Council's plates shifted to a deep, contemplative blue. Through their shared consciousness, Jonas felt their internal struggle, the desperate need for help warring with generations of learned caution. Suddenly, the chamber's crystals began to pulse erratically. Alarm rippled through the assembled aliens as readings appeared on various devices. Jonas didn't need a mental connection to understand what was happening. The very system they were using to conduct this trial was experiencing the degradation they feared. "Let me help," Jonas shouted as the crystal's glow began to fade. "I've studied your technology. Theric and we've already begun to understand." But before he could finish, the chamber's power failed completely, plunging them into darkness. In the chaos that followed, Jonas felt Theric's hand grasp his arm, pulling him toward what felt like a concealed exit. The last thing he heard was Lieutenant Parker's voice through his communicator. "Captain, we're detecting massive power fluctuations across the entire settlement. The Stellar Explorer is launching rescue operations." "No." Jonas tried to respond, but the communicator had gone dead. In the darkness, surrounded by the panicked humming of hundreds of aliens, he realized that the next few moments would determine not just his fate, but the future of two species. The trust he had worked so hard to build was about to be tested in ways he never could have imagined. The crystalline tunnels that had seemed so beautiful hours before now took on a more sinister aspect in the emergency lighting. Jonas ran alongside Theric, their footsteps echoing off the walls as they navigated the labyrinthine passages. Behind them, the humming of their pursuers grew steadily louder. "We need to reach my ship," Jonas gasped as they paused at an intersection. "If they launch a rescue operation, it could trigger a conflict that neither of us wants." Theric's plates shifted to a pattern that Jonas had come to recognize as agreement, but the alien's next mental impression carried a warning: the path to the surface was heavily guarded. The Guardians had deployed their security forces not just to capture them, but to intercept any human rescue attempt. A distant explosion rocked the tunnel, sending crystalline shards raining down around them. Through their mental connection, Jonas saw Theric's vision of what was happening above. The Stellar Explorer had launched shuttlecraft, while the aliens' defensive systems were powering up, drawing precious energy from their already failing grid. "There has to be another way," Jonas muttered, studying the geometric patterns in the tunnel walls. During their earlier scientific exchange, Theric had shown him how their crystal technology created interconnected networks throughout the settlement. If he could just remember the pattern that indicated. Theric suddenly pulled him into a side passage as heavy footsteps approached. They pressed themselves against the cool crystal surface, hardly daring to breathe. A squad of Guardians passed by, their plates glowing with determination. In the dim light, Jonas could see they carried some kind of energy weapons. Once the patrol had passed, Theric guided Jonas to a section of wall that looked no different from any other. But when the alien pressed his hand against it, the crystal became transparent, revealing a maintenance tunnel barely large enough for Theric to crawl through. They had no choice. Jonas went first, with Theric somehow managing to fold his massive frame into the cramped space behind him. The tunnel was a tight fit, and the crystal walls seemed to pulse with the beating of Jonas's heart. He could feel the heat of Theric's body behind him, and the alien's humming had dropped to a frequency so low it was more vibration than sound. Through occasional mental touches, Theric shared his knowledge of the maintenance network. These tunnels, originally designed for crystal maintenance drones, ran throughout the settlement. More importantly, they led to an ancient facility that might hold the key to saving Theric's people, if they could reach it. The journey was grueling. The tunnels twisted and turned, sometimes forcing them to backtrack when they encountered collapsed sections. The air grew thinner as they descended deeper into the planet's crust, and the crystal walls began to exhibit strange properties, sometimes becoming temporarily transparent to reveal dizzying views of massive caverns below. During one of their rest stops, Jonas received a brief, static-filled transmission from Lieutenant Parker: "Captain, multiple casualties, diplomatic incident, orders from Earth Command." The message cut off, but its implications were clear. The situation above was deteriorating rapidly. Jonas had to find a way to stop this before it escalated into full-scale conflict. Through their mental connection, Theric shared more of his species' history. The facility they were trying to reach was one of the original settlement sites, abandoned generations ago when the crystal degradation first began. But Theric believed it still contained working examples of their original technology that might hold the solution to their current crisis. As they continued their journey, Jonas noticed that the crystal walls were becoming more regular, more artificial in their formation. They were nearing something built by intelligent hands. But they weren't the only ones headed there. Distant vibrations suggested multiple groups converging on their location. "They've figured out where we're going," Jonas realized aloud. Theric's plates shifted to a concerned purple, confirming his fears. The next mental impression Jonas received was so powerful it nearly knocked him over. He saw a vast chamber filled with pristine crystals, their light pulsing with the same frequency as the ones in Theric's body. At the chamber's center stood a device of incredible complexity, its purpose unclear but its importance obvious. This was what they had come for, the key to understanding and possibly reversing the crystal degradation. But reaching it would mean crossing paths with both the Guardian forces and the human rescue team. Worse, the facility's defensive systems were still active after all these centuries, programmed to destroy any unauthorized visitors to protect its secrets. "How close are we?" Jonas asked, though he already knew the answer from the increasing complexity of the crystal patterns around them. Theric's response was to point to a section of wall ahead that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. As they approached the barrier, Jonas could feel the power emanating from whatever lay beyond. The crystal here was different, older, yet somehow more alive. This was the source, he realized. This was where it had all begun for Theric's people. But before they could figure out how to bypass the barrier, a massive tremor shook the tunnel. The crystal walls groaned under some immense pressure, and cracks began to appear in the ceiling. Through their connection, Jonas felt Theric's sudden terror, not of the collapse, but of what was causing it. The Guardians, in their desperation to stop them, had activated some kind of fail-safe system. The entire crystal network was being forced into resonance, a process that would either grant them emergency access to the facility or tear the whole structure apart. As the tunnel began to collapse around them, Jonas and Theric faced a terrible choice: retreat to safety, or risk everything on one final push toward their goal. The barrier before them pulsed with increasing intensity, its light almost blinding now. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer, punctuated by the ominous cracking of crystal under stress. In that moment, through their shared consciousness, Jonas and Theric reached the same conclusion. They had come too far to turn back now. Whatever lay beyond that barrier, they would face it together, or not at all. The crystal barrier shattered with a sound like breaking glass multiplied 1,000-fold. Jonas and Theric were thrown forward into a vast chamber that defied comprehension. Massive crystals, each larger than the Stellar Explorer, formed a geodesic dome that pulsed with pure, white light. At the chamber's center stood a crystalline spire that seemed to draw energy from the very planet itself. But they weren't alone. Guardian forces had breached the chamber from another entrance, their weapons trained on both Jonas and Theric. From a third direction came Lieutenant Parker and a team of heavily armed humans, their faces grim behind protective visors. "Captain Reed," Parker called out, "step away from the alien." "That's an order from Earth Command." The lead Guardian's humming translated through the chamber's ancient systems: "Surrender the human, Theric. Your betrayal ends here." Jonas felt Theric's hand on his shoulder, and in that touch came understanding. The spire before them wasn't just a power source, it was the original seed crystal from which all their technology had grown. Its degradation had triggered a cascade effect throughout their entire civilization. But it could be restored, at a price. "Everyone, stand down." Jonas's voice echoed through the chamber. "You don't understand what's at stake here." Through their mental connection, Theric shared the final piece of the puzzle. The seed crystal required a consciousness to guide its regeneration, but the process would consume that consciousness entirely. Theric had known this all along. It was why he had sought Jonas out, not just for human technology, but for the strength to do what needed to be done. No, Jonas said firmly, understanding Theric's intention. There has to be another way. The chamber shuddered as another tremor rocked the facility. Cracks appeared in the massive crystals overhead, sending shards raining down around them. The Guardians and humans alike took cover, momentarily forgetting their standoff in the face of imminent collapse. Jonas looked at the humans who had followed him across the stars, then at the aliens whose very existence hung by a thread. In that moment, he understood what he had to do. "Lieutenant Parker," he called out, "tell Earth what you find here. Tell them everything." Then, before anyone could stop him, Jonas sprinted toward the central spire. "Captain, no." Parker's shout mixed with the Guardian's harmonic cries of alarm. But it was Theric who reached him, the alien's massive hand closing around Jonas's arm. The mental impression was desperate. "This is not your burden to bear." "You're wrong," Jonas said, smiling up at his friend. "This was always where we were headed. Your people still need you, Theric. Mine will understand." With strength born of desperation, Jonas broke free of Theric's grip and pressed his hand against the seed crystal. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Energy coursed through his body, his consciousness expanding to encompass the entire crystalline network. He saw everything, every connection, every flaw, every possibility. Through eyes that were quickly becoming something else, Jonas saw Theric's people drop their weapons, their plates shifting to colors of awe and grief. He saw Parker order his team to stand down, tears streaming down his weathered face. And he saw Theric, his friend from across the stars, reach out one last time to share his mind. In that final connection, Jonas shared everything he was, all his memories, his hopes, his understanding of both their species. He felt himself becoming part of something vast and beautiful, his consciousness spreading through the crystal network like light through a prism. The regeneration began. The seed crystal blazed with renewed energy, sending pulses of healing light throughout the entire settlement. Degraded crystals renewed themselves, networks reformed, and the very air seemed to sing with restored power. As Jonas's physical form began to fade, becoming one with the crystal, his voice echoed through the chamber one last time, "Remember this moment. Remember that when two species reached across the gulf of space, they found not enemies, but friends. Remember that one life freely given can save many. Remember." His voice faded, but the crystal continued to pulse with a rhythm that somehow carried an echo of his consciousness. Where Jonas had stood, the seed crystal now glowed with a warm, steady light that felt both alien and familiar. Theric was the first to move, placing his hand on the crystal. The mental impression he received was faint but unmistakable. Jonas was still there, transformed but not gone, his consciousness woven into the very fabric of their civilization. In the days that followed, the legend of Jonas Reed spread throughout both species. To humans, he became a symbol of sacrifice and the potential for true cooperation between different forms of life. To Theric's people, he became part of their collective consciousness, his memories and emotions preserved in the crystal network he had saved. The Guardians, witnessing his sacrifice, finally understood what Theric had seen in these strange beings from Earth. Relations between the two species grew stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared loss. The human scientists who came to study the crystal technology worked side by side with Theric's people, each learning from the other. And sometimes, late in the night when the crystals pulsed with their strange, beautiful light, visitors to the chamber would swear they could feel a familiar presence, curious, brave, and full of hope for the future that two species would build together. Theric often returned to the chamber, placing his hand on the seed crystal and sharing thoughts with what remained of his friend. The crystal's response, while not quite human anymore, still carried Jonas's essential nature, his curiosity, his courage, and his unshakable belief that in the vast darkness of space, different species could reach across the void and find not just allies, but family. In the end, Jonas Reed had given everything to forge a bridge between two civilizations. But in doing so, he had become something more than either human or alien. He had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that the greatest discoveries come not from fear and isolation, but from trust and sacrifice. And in the soft humming of the crystal network, in the countless minds it touched and the civilizations it would nurture, Jonas's legacy lived on, a testament to the day a brave man risked everything to meet a 12-foot alien, and in doing so, changed the course of two species forever.